From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
My name is Nicholas Brown. I'm a music specialist and concert producer here at the Library of Congress. So great to see so many of you here today. It's my great pleasure to introduce a wonderful musicologist. Her name is Susan Youens. She is the J.W. Van Gorkom Professor of Music and a Professor of Musicology at the University of Notre Dame. She received a Ph.D. and M.A. from Harvard University as well as a Master of Music from Southwestern University. Susan is one of the foremost experts on German song, Schubert and Hugo Wolf in the world, which is really great and very exciting for us to have her here today. She has received many numerous honors for her work, including fellowships from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Humanities Center, the Guggenheim Foundation, and the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton. She has authored over 8 books, including the 1991 publication of Retracing a Winter's Journey, Schubert's Winterreise, and the 2007 Heinrich Heine and the Lied. She's also authored over 50 articles for journals. She's a former board member of the American Musicological Society and was recently honored with the honorary membership of the American Musicological Society. She is a native of Houston, Texas, and previously taught at Washington University in St. Louis and at Ithaca College. We have Susan's books in the collections of the music division, so if you ever want to check them out for free, come over and see them. You can't take them out of the building, but you're free to peruse in the reading room. And without further ado, please welcome Susan.
It does my heart good to see so many Schubert lovers shoehorned into one place. 30 years after Franz Schubert's death, on November 19, 1828, his friend Joseph von Spaun wrote the following famous passage in his reminiscences of the composer. For some time, Schubert appeared very upset and melancholy. When I asked him what was troubling him, he would say only, "Soon you will hear and understand." One day he said to me, "Come over to Schober's today, and I will sing you a cycle of bone-chilling songs. I'm anxious to know what you will say about them. They have cost me more effort than any of my other songs." So he sang the entire Winterreise through to us in a voice full of emotion. We were utterly dumbfounded by the mournful, gloomy tone of these songs, and Schubert said that only one, Der Linden Balm, the linden tree, had appealed to him. To this, Schubert replied, "I like these songs more than all the rest, and someday you will come to like them as well." No wonder his friends were taken aback when they heard this work. Winterreise is not graceful, not pretty, not light. It isn't meant for the bourgeois parlor where amateur musicians entertain themselves at home. Instead, it presents us with artistic meaning of a different order, analogous to Rembrandt's searing portraits of his own old age. Here, Schubert claims for small songs the same importance automatically granted to the big genres of music. Each individual song strikes deep, whatever its brevity, and the accumulation of 24 of them challenges the scope of operas, symphonies, and string quartets. It seems almost inconceivable that this work, the epitome of dark soul searching, issued from someone barely 30 years old at the time of composition, but then geniuses can give shape and substance to the mysteries of existence in ways beyond the ken of the rest of us. That these conundrums include the often agonized work of figuring out who we really are and how we are to confront death is only to be expected. The poet of Winterreise was a contemporary of Schubert's named Ville Hal Muller, born in 1794 in Dessau, at the time a small town north of Leipzig. Like Schubert, he was of humble origins. He was the son of a tailor. And his studies at the University of Berlin, both before and after the wars of liberation from Napoleon, were sponsored by Duke Leopold Friedrich of Anhalt-Dessau, who recognized the boy's brightness and promise. After the battles against the French were over, the young Muller returned to Berlin, where he fell in love with the 17-year-old Louisa Hensel, a very gifted poet whose artist brother would later marry Fanny Mendelssohn. I am currently over the moon about Fanny Hensel's gorgeous songs, 200 plus of them. It was at the Berlin court counselor Friedrich von Stegemann's house, in the course of weekly artistic salons for their daughter and her friends, that the unrequited love of Wilhelm Müller for Louisa played out as the young people worked together on a drama filled with songs, a Liederspiel, entitled The Beautiful Miller Maid, Die schöne Müllerin. Müller would later revise this creation by committee as entirely his own work, and Schubert would set it to immortal music in 1823. No wonder he reacted with such immediate enthusiasm to the discovery of Müller's winter journey 3 or 4 years later. Müller was a prolific writer whose works reflect the interests of many German intellectuals and poets in the second and third decades of the 19th century. For example, medieval German literature. In 1816, he translated a volume of courtly love poetry from Middle High German into modern German, including a famous poem about love under the linden tree in the meadow, written by a poet with my favorite name in all of literary history, Walter von der Vogelweide. Say that 6 times fast. He also contributed to Homeric studies and to the burgeoning Italian travel writing of the period. He went to Rome and wrote an utterly delightful book about his youthful impressions and experiences there. He edited 10 volumes of 17th century German poetry and translated Christopher Marlowe's drama, The Tragical History of Dr. Faustus, into German. His translation is still performed in Germany today. It's the standard version of Marlowe. He was famous throughout much of the 19th century as the German Byron, because he too was a Philhellene, someone whose frustrated liberal political ideals found an outlet in the European movement to support the Greeks in their war of independence from the Ottoman Empire. Byron, of course, actually went to Greece and died there at Missolonghi. The Griechenlieder, or Greek songs, that appeared in 6 pamphlets between 1821 and 1824 were Müller's best-known works, meant to inspire Europeans to fight on Greece's behalf and to exalt freedom of speech from within a German society notoriously opposed to the free expression of political ideas. Muller had more than one brush with the powerful censorship bureaucracy of the day, given his sometimes very acid political commentary. For example, the Leipzig literary anthology Urania for 1822 was placed under the Damnatur by the censors. Damnatur, I think, is self-explanatory. Banned from appearance or dissemination in any venue. The next edition of this same anthology contained Müller's first 12 poems for Die Winterreise. In other words, Schubert's source of texts for this song cycle was a banned publication. And Schubert, by the way, had his own run-ins with authority in Metternich's Vienna. I have romped on at some length about Müller because starting in the late 19th century with the influential Viennese music critic Eduard Hanslick, some of you will know him from Wagner's caricature in his opera The Master Singers of Nuremberg. It was the done thing to condemn Müller as a third-rate poet, someone whose naive, inept poems were transformed by Schubert's music. This silk purse out of a sow's ear attitude prevailed for a century thereafter. It's what I was taught in undergraduate and graduate school. But such views can and do change when later generations examine the evidence anew. In Müller's opinion, naturalness, truth, and simplicity were paramount in poetry. Grandiosity and hyperbolic eloquence, he believed, deformed the truth of feeling. Craft should be hidden, not overtly displayed. Poetic forms should mimic nature in their organic development from the poet's own innermost being. And beauty of sound in poetry should come from the linkage between form and content. According to Müller, the simplicity and expressivity he sought was best exemplified in folk poetry, and his understanding of how to merge folk poetry's forms and themes with sophisticated modern content was both original and powerful. The indisputably great poet Heinrich Heine even wrote Müller a letter of praise, thanking him for, quote, showing me the way. And in fact, there was a real change in Heine's verse after encountering Wilhelm Müller's poetry. Schubert, one of the most astute judges of poetry in all of music history, recognized the quality of this verse and plumbed its depths in his songs. Sadly, Müller, like Schubert, was not granted a long life. It gives one pause to think, oh, he died unexpectedly on the night of October the 1st, 1827, possibly of a stroke, possibly a heart attack. It gives one pause to think that Schubert was perhaps completing his compositional labors on Winterreise at that same time, and that Müller never heard this music. I can neither play nor sing, yet when I write poetry, I sing and play after all, Müller wrote in his diary on his 21st birthday. But have courage, he continued. Perhaps there is a kindred spirit somewhere who will hear the melodies behind my words and give them back to me. There was indeed a kindred spirit beyond most poets' wildest dreams of musical collaboration, although he never knew it. Müller was a painstaking poet who wrote and published his cycle in 3 stages, and this piecemeal assemblage affected the genesis of the music. The first stage was entitled Wanderlieder von Ville Hal Muller, Wandering Songs by Ville Hal Muller, The Winter Journey in 12 Songs. And it was published in the Urania anthology I've already mentioned. Schubert thought it was a completed work, it's presented as such, and set it to music as a cycle that begins and ends in the same key, in D minor. Just when he did this, we don't know exactly. The autograph manuscript is dated February 1827, but that date appears on a clean copy of the first song inserted into the manuscript. Another messier version surely preceded it. I love looking at this manuscript, which is in the Pierpont Morgan Library in New York. There are pages that look as if World War III was fought on them. So filled are they with revisions and alterations. You can practically see Schubert in full creative hue and cry. I brought my facsimile copy and have marked some of the folios that are particularly battle-scarred for you to glimpse. Just to give you one example before I pass it around. Look at all the scribblings and cross-hatchings and deletions and changes of mind about the composition. So I'll pass that around. At the end of the 12th song, Einsamkeit, or loneliness, you find the word fine, the end, written with a big flourish that's understandable after his struggles with the radical music of these songs. But of course, it wasn't the end. Muller had published 10 additional works for the cycle in another periodical, and then had added 2 more poems for the final and completed version, published in his 1824 anthology with the resounding title, get ready for it, Poems from the Posthumous Papers of a Traveling Horn Player, Volume 2, Songs of Love and Life. The title is an ironic swipe at as many different emblems of Romanticism as he could cram into one place. This was Schubert's source for his part 2, which he calls the Fortsetzung der Winterreise, the continuation of the winter journey. Muller, for reasons we can only guess, changed the order of the poems at this last stage, and Schubert couldn't duplicate his arrangement without disrupting the musical structure he had already created. So he simply set the remaining poems in order. The only exception is the 22nd and 23rd poems, which Schubert flips or reverses, putting Mut, or courage, before Die Nebensonnen, the mock sons. According to Schubert's publisher, Tobias Haslinger, the correction of the proofs for part 2 was Die letzten Federstriche, the last stroke of Schubert's pen. For his poetic cycle, Die Winterreise, the Winter Journey, Schubert omits the definite article. And I hope I've already made the point that the poetic cycle and the musical cycle are really 2 different works. For his poetic cycle, Muller does something typical of him. He adopts a conventional subject from the stockpile of Romanticism's favorite themes. In this case, a journey by an isolated, alienated wanderer with a tragic finale in madness or death, and puts his own stamp on it. This cycle is a monodrama, a work in which a single character probes his or her soul in search both of self-knowledge and of release from unbearable psychological torment. What defines monodrama is the exclusion of any other speaking characters and the obliteration of as much awareness on our part of the poet's control as possible. Whatever we know in this cycle, we know only from the wanderer's point of view. He talks to himself as if entirely alone, and we spy on what he thinks and feels with no narrator present to amplify or explain anything. Unlike Die schöne Müllerin, there is no plot in any conventional sense, only a series of outcries of scorched sensibility, initially set in motion by grief over the beloved's marriage to someone else, but actually striking deeper than that, to basic questions of identity. It matters that we are never told the name of the thoughtful, philosophically inclined man we meet in this work, or any other name for that matter. We're never told what he looks like, except that he has black hair, how old he is, his occupation, his parents, his upbringing, or personal history. The lack of concrete information underscores the mythic nature of this work and reinforces its interiority. If we know nothing of the Winter Wanderer's resume, we learn a great deal about his inner life. Because beginnings matter, I want to start by focusing on the first song, Gute Nacht, Good Night, for a few moments. The poetry first, then Schubert's music. And I think you all have the texts and translations. And this is on page 13 in the booklet. Notice the title. Muller often ended his post-war Berlin student diary entries with the words, Gute Nacht, Louisa, adding the plaintive phrase, if only you had heard my sighing, in November 1815. And this is the poem. You can see that it's in octave or 8-line stanzas. A stranger I arrived, a stranger I depart. May was good to me with many a flower garland. The maiden spoke of love, the mother even of marriage. Now we know where Heine got some of his ironic bent. Now the world is so dark, the path covered in snow. For my travels, I cannot choose the time. I must find my own way in this darkness. A moon shadow travels with me as my companion, and in the white fields, I seek the tracks of wild animals. Why should I wait any longer until they drive me away? Let mad dogs howl before their master's house. Love loves to wander, God made it so, from one man to the other. Dear beloved, good night. I don't want to bother your dreams. It would be a shame to disturb your rest. You shall not hear my steps. Softly, softly, the door is closed. I write as I pass, good night, on the gate, that you may see I thought of you. The very first word of this cycle is fremd, stranger. The wanderer is a fremdling, acutely conscious of his sense of alienation from others. Late 18th and early 19th century novelists and popular philosophers began to delve in their own way into what we now call psychology, and Muller's Winter Wanderer is part of this phenomenon. For one brief Maytime season, he tells us, his wanderings and his isolation were exchanged for love of a maiden, with marriage a real possibility. And marriage means belonging, both to society's microcosm, the family is the smallest unit of society, and its macrocosm. Now, all of that is gone, and anger, grief, paranoia, despairing sarcasm, and scorn all crowd in to take its place. When the wanderer is jilted, he loses more than the love of a single person. He loses the hope that human bonds are possible for him. His first question to himself, the first of many in this cycle, is, why should I tarry any longer until they drive me out? Words that vividly convey his sense of being a misfit, a pariah, out of place in a hostile world. Who are they, we ask? The parents, the town, the rest of humanity, all of the above? The exclamation, "Lass ihre Hunde heulen vor ihres Herren Haus," with its breathy, emphatic H's and sharp E sounds, is wonderfully ambivalent. If he equates people by analogy with stray dogs, he is also invoking himself, the mangy cur, the rejected lover who stands outside his sweetheart's house and howls in pain. Recognizing that he is also a stranger to himself, he resolves to journey into the wintry geography of his own soul in order to find out who he is and why he is so different from other people. How long this existential quest will last, he cannot predict. Time in the realm of this cycle is not ruled by the clock or the calendar. Characters in romantic literature often yearn for transcendence and seek it by many means, but not this post-romantic winter wanderer. In the last half of stanza 3, the wanderer assigns the cause of his grief to the cosmic order, to a God who cruelly designed an imperfect principle of love. Neither romantic nihilism nor romantic mysticism is at work here. The lack of a benevolent deity in the wanderer's cosmos is briefly but strongly established and then taken for granted. He is no Byronic atheist who probes his loss of faith. If he rails against the cruelty of a misdirected universe, he doesn't seek to understand it. His own mysteries are quite sufficient cause for anguish, but it does matter that there is no transcendent realm to which he can appeal. Instead, he is obsessed with the contrast between reality and imagination, between the past and the present, between dreams and the brute, harsh, real world. Muller's words in the last stanza reveal a view of dreams as privileged realms of happiness and escape from misery. True, they are untrue and they deceive us, but they are also precious and we cannot bear to give them up. This is a recurring theme throughout the cycle. Schubert's understanding of this crucial red thread woven through the work is evident in certain compositional choices he makes near the end of Gute Nacht. Composers don't have to agree with their poets, by the way. They can contradict them and override them. And Schubert does just that here. When the wanderer at the close of stanza 3 sarcastically says, "Fein Liebchen, gute Nacht," you could translate Fein Liebchen in a snide tone as dainty darling. Those words impel a return to thoughts of her and of night and dreams in the final stanza. The poet invites us to invest the lines, I will not disturb you in your dreams. It would be a shame to spoil your rest. With more than a little tinge of angry sarcasm. Why should you care that I'm in ruins, you and your undisturbed dreams of which I have no place any longer? But Schubert, wonderful Schubert, contradicts Muller outright, rejecting any taint of anger. Instead, he makes that moment tender beyond the power of any of my words to describe it. The moment when all the D minor darkness that precedes it, think of Mozart's Requiem in D minor, is altered in a heartbeat to the brightness of D major is magic. I've never played one of these contraptions before, so this may be a doomed effort. But I'll play the entire song by really good people in a minute. And this is the moment when this transformation happens. With a spoon every time I hear that passage, which I've heard thousands of times by now and never loses its power. The fact that the music doesn't stop beforehand but flows directly into transformation only adds to the effect. Before we hear the song, let me point out a few other details representative of Schubert's radical compositional practices, his extraordinary insights into poetry, and his ability to turn poetic ideas into music. In the piano introduction, we hear a measured tread, repeated chords with hollow perfect fifths in the left hand that suggest a fateful, tragic atmosphere. These groupings of 4 repeated pitches or chords throughout Gute Nacht are what I call the journeying figure, and it recurs sporadically thereafter to symbolize the idea of the journey. For example, in the 21st song, Das Wirtshaus, or the Inn, the wanderer comes to a cemetery and fancies that it is an inn whose evergreen garlands welcome weary travelers to take refuge. When he asks the innkeeper Death for a room, he is turned away, the refusal evident in the wanderer's disappointed rhetorical question, O unbarmherzige doch weisest du mich ab? O you unmerciful innkeeper, do you nonetheless turn me away? In Muller's poem, the unwelcome answer no is implied in the empty gap between stanzas 3 and 4, but in Schubert's setting, the answer sounds in the piano. A single statement of the journeying figure as a sign to wanderer and listener alike that the journey must continue. You don't hear the journeying figure any other time in that song, but in the gap between stanzas 3 and 4, after the end of the vocal phrase, then you hear returning to Gute Nacht, when the right hand comes in at the end of the first measure, we hear not a lyrical melody of some sort, not a tune, but a steep descending trajectory that is a directional metaphor for disillusionment, culminating in savage sounding dissonances before those discords resolve back into minor mode darkness. This introduction to the first song, I think, is sufficient indication to listeners that this is not parlor music. Dissonances, and Schubert supplies me with a lot of them. And that dissonance is on a weak beat in the measure and accented. Thereafter, throughout the cycle, you're going to hear these offbeat accents, often with dissonances applied, as representations both of stumbling footsteps in the dark and of psychic inner turmoil. And I should point out another heart-stopping aspect of this song is, I may never leave this song. I should point out another heart-stopping aspect of it as well, the way it ends. Throughout Winterreise, the realm of beautiful imagination and major mode brightness is always susceptible to destruction by the renewed awareness of cold reality. Schubert's Wanderer twice sings the last line of the poem, that I thought of you, that I thought of you, an dich hab ich gedacht. The first time in the major mode of illusions, dreams, and sweetness. The second time in the minor mode that never really went away. It is those words in minor that echo twice in the inner voices of the piano postlude, couched inside the journeying figure. I can't discuss every song in the cycle as much as I'd like to. I will instead focus on a few of what I call hinge moments in this work, moments when the wanderer undergoes some sort of epiphany or revelation. Something in the mind cracks open and a horrifying insight is made clear. One of those epiphanies occurs in number 5, Der Linden Balm, on page 15. Without a doubt, the most famous individual song in the whole work. It was extracted in the 19th century hundreds of times for inclusion in what Germans call Kommersbücher, collections of folk songs, student songs, drinking songs, hunting songs, patriotic songs, etc., with Der Linden Balm often printed among the folk songs and without attribution to Schubert. Muller is adept at suggesting those motions of mind that lead from one inner experience to another. And this song is the direct consequence of number 4, Erstarrung, or numbness, in which the wanderer searches frantically through the snow for the grass and flowers that used to be there when he walked with his sweetheart. He knows that his actions are pointless. Rational understanding is there, but he is driven to do so anyway, and Schubert sets the final realization of futility to the music of irrational desire. Throughout the song, we hear incessant triplet figures. This is the longest song in the cycle, too. You hear those triplet figures a lot. These are figures that convey the thrumming restlessness and the unending circular motion of his grief. And it is this motion which gives rise to the similar remembered rustling of the linden leaves in the next song. You can hear the relationship very clearly. Julius Drake plays it better than I do. In this way, Schubert suggests that the sad realization in Erstarrung of love's eventual obliteration from memory impels in reaction the death wish in the next song. The poem of Der Linden Balm begins like a true folk poem or fairy tale, with its well, its gate, and its linden tree, which has a long history in German literature as a lover's rendezvous and a symbol for all that is gentle and beneficent in nature. In Schubert's lengthy piano introduction to this song, we hear first the rustling sounds born of Erstarrung, but here culminating with a musical question mark. That's the ending of the figure. That one step interval hung up higher. What does this memory mean? We then hear a brief silence, followed by the same rustling, now at a higher plane, as if he is more conscious of it. The extension of this second statement leads downward, a directional submergence in the past and in memory that culminates in echoing horn call figures. Evocative of wandering horn players in the German forests, and by extension, of idealized romantic memories of idyllic bygone times. Schubert's music thus traces the dawning awareness that precedes Muller's words, with the horn calls heralding arrival in memory at the well before the gate where the linden tree stands. An entire drama within the mind transpires before a single word is sung. I must talk like Chippy Chipmunk when I try to time lectures because I never get it right. When the words began, so does one of the best-known melodies in the world. As long as the wanderer remains immersed in his beautiful memories, the torment of his present existence recedes from awareness, and the music reflects a rare unanimity of design, with the voice and piano in perfect concord. Such privileged moments of escape are rare in this cycle, and they never last for more than a few minutes before the present intrudes once again. Schubert has the rustling voices from the first two measures reappear in dark minor mode just after the words, "I was ever drawn to it in joy and sorrow." The wanderer's refuge in the past now draws him seamlessly into the present in order to tempt him with the promise of peace and rest. The soft sounds that spell love, nature, homecoming, youth, now seem like voices that say, "Come here to me, companion, here you will find rest." This invitation is a beckoning to death. It is only in death that we truly become one with nature. Realizing this, the wanderer becomes all the more aware of the cold and darkness of existence and of the sting of the icy wind in his face. And yet, when his hat blows away in the storm, he doesn't turn back to retrieve it, but presses forward, although it is such a seductive offer that he continues to hear them calling long after he is distant from that place. The line, "Ich wendete mich nicht," I did not turn back, is the crux of the poem and a moment of great importance in the winter journey. And it comes at the end of a very unfolk song-like tempest that Schubert brews up in the piano. At the very end, in the piano postlude, we hear the linden leaves' seductive rustling again, but Schubert quietly and firmly puts a stop to immersion in such memories with the final cadence. No more of this. I must continue my journey, my life, we hear in this conclusion. Some of you, I'm sure, know that the great writer Thomas Mann invokes Der Linden Balm at the very end of his novel, The Magic Mountain, when his protagonist, Hans Castorp, charges into battle in World War I while singing this very song under his breath, unaware that he's doing so. In Mann's tale, an acculturated Teutonic death wish links the Great War and a Schubert song. From this moment on, the wanderer both longs for death and yet refuses to bring it about by his own hand. That life, even an existence this wretched, exerts a force that cannot be denied, is one of the somber recurring themes of this cycle. In number 14, Der Greise Kopf, the gray head, he wakes up with frost on his hair and imagines that he has grown old overnight, blessedly nearer to death. But the frost melts and the horror of the continued journey resumes. In number 15, Die Krähe, or the crow, he hopes that the crow flying overhead is an omen of his imminent demise, that perhaps it, unlike the sweetheart, will be faithful unto death. Treue bis zum Grabe, words from the German marriage service. But it flies away and leaves him still living. Eventually, the wanderer's journey brings him to a grim epiphany in the 20th song, Der Wegweiser, or the signpost, on page 21. This is the most powerful hinge moment of revelation in this entire cycle. For the first time, the wanderer asks himself why his journey is so different from that of others and why he chooses to be so isolated. When he asks what foolish desire drives him into the wilderness, the adjective törichtes, foolish or crazy, speaks volumes about his frustration and about the desperate need to know what compulsion governs his every action and condemns him to self-exile from others of his own volition. The kinship between the first song, Gute Nacht, and Der Wegweiser is a bridge spanning much of the cycle, because in both of those two works, the principal subject is the journey itself. And of course, the journey is an ages-old Homeric symbol for life, right? Its nature and its cause. And the journeying figure therefore appears throughout both works with special intensity in the later song. In the piano introduction in the beginning, you hear because the wanderer probes his journey as something he must finally understand, the figure from so long ago is subjected to radical new harmonizations and shifting registers. In particular, what happens on the final page of this song is one of the most quietly monumental passages Schubert ever wrote. As the journeying figure appears in its starkest guise by itself in the piano, the wanderer sees the signpost and at last understands his fate. Part of this poem's power is that the wanderer, believing himself alone, need not explain the symbolism of what he sees. He simply knows it. The words about a road from which no one comes back will, of course, recall Hamlet's lines in To Be or Not to Be about the afterlife as, quote, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns. But Muller made a habit of varying his borrowed literary references in accord with his own enterprise, and I think that he does so here. What if the signpost points the way to continued miserable life as an alienated, perhaps diseased, singer of songs, with inevitable death only far off in the distance? What you hear in this music is tonal disorientation, with a rising chromatic bass line being one index of rising horror in the mind. The Wanderer repeats the entire final verse, and on its repetition, the outer voices in the piano, I'll play it in a second, the outer voices in the piano come closer together, the left hand rising, the right hand descending, en route to some distant vanishing point that anyone would fear. With the notation as well. At one measure, or at one point you have rising intervals of a minor third. And Schubert spells it in such a way that if you stay only with minor third intervals, you never come back to your starting point. And I think the symbolism of that is breathtaking. For the remainder of Winterreise, the Wanderer goes on as best he can, engaging for one brief moment in false bravado that cannot last, and always wishing for death. How is this to end, we ask? And Muller rose to the challenge with his very best work. He had a knack for ending cycles in the most unforgettable ways, and de Leiermann, the hurdy-gurdy player, is a case in point. And you have the text on pages 22 and 23. This is a hallucinatory vision of a beggar musician beyond the bounds of society, someone the dogs won't even tolerate, a creature who wordlessly grinds out music so obsessive and elemental that it barely deserves the name of music. The myriad descriptive details in this poem, you could turn it into a painting or drawing very easily, all hinge on the fact that the old musician continues to play his instrument despite the cold, the dogs, and the lack of an audience. And he lets it all go on as it will. In that vague, undefined it is contained the entire powerlessness of the old man and the wanderer, those twin figures of a divided consciousness. Music stripped to the bare bone is all that is left when the wanderer's hopes for human bonds and for death now, this very minute, are no more. The music is always the same, and the beggar's plate is always empty. Symbols for life as emptiness and futile repetition. This poem is a bitter twist on the truth that extremities of pain and grief can be sublimated in art. Rather, Der Leiermann enacts a tragic human reality. Finding an audience, a companion, has much to do with how one keeps going, even if the only audience possible is a projection of nightmare fears about misery's continuation into a wretched old age. What Schubert does with these bleak words is, in its utmost economy of means, as radical a departure from the conventions of 19th century song as his foreshadowings of Wagner elsewhere. And we must remember that when Schubert set these poems to music, especially Der Leiermann, he was confronting his own probable fate. Enough was known in the 1820s about the terminal stages of syphilis, a long drawn-out death sentence in the days before penicillin. For Schubert to realize that the disease he had contracted in late 1822 or early 1823 often ended in horrifying dementia and paralysis before the release wrought by death. Both Robert Schumann and Hugo Wolf would have to endure this ghastly fate later in the century. Schubert might well have wondered as he read Der Leiermann whether he too would be condemned to suffer what we see and hear in the final song, a future with his creative faculties numbed and the capacity to create music restricted to a single phrase, repeated mindlessly over and over again. The cycle ends on a terrifying question mark for which there is no answer, only the echoing silence following the dying away drone of the hurdy-gurdy. Realizing this, one understands what a heroic act it was for Schubert to set this text, of all texts, to music, to fashion transcendent art from the worst fear imaginable. Somewhat fancifully, I like to think that death, perhaps flattered by Schubert's many and varied portraits of him in music, spared the composer the fate he most dreaded, taking him swiftly before syphilitic insanity and paralysis could claim him as their own. Despite the tragedy of his premature death, and we will always wonder what might have been, we can only be grateful that he did not become the wanderer, but instead turned him into songs I like better than all the rest. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.